So welcome to the MLA Genetics Forum. To give the official welcome, we have our first speaker, which is Mick Crowley. Mick's the General Manager for Research, Development and Adoption. Mick started his journey in MLA as part of the MSA team, and he's risen through the ranks to become the General Manager. So without further ado, please welcome Mick for opening the forum. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be back together. It's been a while in the making. I thought, though, making the most of bringing us all together. It's great to see all of the side events that are happening because I guess as we're seeing, when you look across the room today, we've got representation across the whole industry. Livestock producers at the coalface, service providers, processors, and I guess that's a bit of a theme for us really, is how do we connect across the whole supply chain to add value? And it all starts back with genetics and how we make genetic decisions, but how that flows on into the supply chain. And I took an approach today where I thought, well, but what are we trying to achieve? So understanding what are the drivers out there for demand for our product, what's changing in the production system, and what problems do we need genetics to solve for us? So I'm sort of working from the markets all the way back. Because the environment in which we operate, I guess, changes the way in which we invest. And it's a pretty bright picture at the moment. And in terms of the value of the industry, we've got about a $24 billion beef and sheep meat industry. When we add live exports on top of that, there's the cattle live export jobs close to $2 billion today. And the demand continues to be quite strong. We're hearing from various stakeholders in the supply chain about the demand for our product. They just want more, and we're in a constrained supply scenario. But where we're supplying those big markets in Japan, Korea, the US and China, make up the big four in terms of our export destinations. And we've got free trade agreements with all those countries. And so reducing the economic barriers to trade are really opening up opportunities for us and keeping us competitive. We've seen big growth in the Middle East, and there's big opportunities in Europe. And I'll talk a little bit about Europe and the UK in a minute. But one of the really important things for us is to also remember that our largest and most valuable market is our domestic market. So it underpins a lot of stability. But we have seen that the domestic market now operates in a global marketplace. They're competing, our domestic customers are now competing for that product in a global context. So if the demand and the prices are outpacing what's happening domestically, our domestic customers need to shift focus, lifting prices, and we're seeing that happening across all our red meat sectors. I was up in Longreach a couple of weeks ago, and there's a lot of the sheep and goat industry expanding again in that part of the world, and they've really adopted and got behind exclusion fencing. But that's off the back of increased demand for goat meat. It's still a very small part of our industry, but big opportunities, I think, when you look at global red meat demand. It's amazing that these two guys did one of the best deals we've seen for a little while. Here they are exchanging biscuits, but the trade agreement does a lot more for red meat. Red meat got a really good deal. So when the UK was when they first joined the EU, that was when some of the quota volumes were established. So our 7,200 tonne Hilton beef quota, which is pretty dismal in the whole scheme of things in Europe, 19,200 tonnes of sheep meat access. The Kiwis had 228,000 tonnes. We got access to a high quality grain-fed beef quota back in 2010, and we maximised our ability to increase our volumes under that quota. It was 45,000 tonnes shared between 6 countries. So the day that the deal comes into force, the beef industry has 35,000 tonnes of access just to the UK, 25,000 tonnes of sheep meat. In 10 years' time, that goes up to 110,000 tonnes and 75,000 tonnes respectively. Then no duty, no quotas beyond 10 years. So it's a real game changer for us in that part of the world. High household income, 60 million people in the UK that are regular red meat eaters. A guy from Ireland rang me on Friday night who's in genetics actually, Andrew Cromie, most of you probably know him. He said, we're a bit nervous about what you're going to do in our market. And I said to him, don't worry, we'll displace all the other imported product that you guys buy, and we'll be going head to head with the Irish in market share for imported product. It's hardly imported when it just has to go on a truck through the tunnel. It's a little bit further for us, but this is a game changer nonetheless. So certainly our ability to supply is somewhat constrained. We've got one of the lowest national adult cattle slaughters in a long time. Our 5-year average is really around 8 million, but we're going to see an increase to not even hit 7 million this calendar year. So we're well down on supply. We're having favourable seasonal conditions in big chunks of the country, not everywhere. It was interesting going into central Queensland, back up there this week in North Queensland. The north is not too bad. They said it wasn't the best wet season, but it's wet enough. And central Queensland turns out to be a pretty big place. So depending on where you are, it's been a lot of storm rain. So some parts have missed out, some parts are really good. So the demand and the growth of the herd is still there. We're seeing a much lower number of females to slaughter, and you can see what's happening in the store market. PDIC heifers and so on are worth a lot of dough. But the demand is there, so talking to some exporters, and there's exporters here today, they'll be able to tell you how things are going from a demand point of view. I'm sure there'll be a little bit of movement in pricing, but ideally, hopefully, we're not far off a level that works for everyone. That would be awesome. It's probably the first time I've presented for a while where we're forecasting the growth in the flock. We've seen such a dramatic change in the makeup of the flock, but I think the economics of the sheep industry are giving people confidence to rebuild off the back of some pretty difficult times in the sheep industry, but certainly a very bright picture on the sheep meat side, and I'll talk about that a bit more as well. So I think it's really important for us to consider that context in how we connect with the supply chain. And that's a bit of a theme from some of the other presenters on the program today. But the way we're structured now, so my role covers end-to-end, because it makes sense for us that when we're investing in R&D, we've got a clear pathway to adoption, that we're considering the whole farm system, breeding, feeding, finishing, starting with the right genetics and making sure we don't stuff it up. But equally, how do we make those decisions to have our customer in mind? And how do those brand specifications evolve to better meet and exceed consumer expectation? Because when we look at that, how do we connect with our consumer and then our customer? That's how we can create and capture more value for everyone involved in the supply chain. So we're structured that way in our investments. And we're starting to see big strides forward in objective measurement technology. We had 3 devices approved for beef grading in the last month. And the MEQ probe approved for IMF in lamb is a game changer. And it's not so much just about the technology, because some of the cameras that were approved are starting off with one measure, so it might do marbling really accurately, for example. And I've got a question from a processor saying, well, why would we want something that only does one trait? Well, what it allows us to do, and it was actually another processor sitting next to them saying, well, actually, I can now integrate that device into my plant. I can set up the data flow. I can understand what information it gives me and what I can do with it. I can start giving feedback to producers. And then we can collect more data that allows us to get those devices accredited for other traits. So we're able to get those devices accredited after such a long lead time from the development into the commercial supply chain. And I think it's really important to understand then what do we do with the information that comes out of having those objective measures. Also, from the automation point of view, if you can just start the one on the left, anything that we can do that reduces cost from the processing sector flows back into underpinning more stability in our pricing for producers. So on the lamb side, we're seeing this now, the installation of automation operating at a commercial level. We started off looking at how can we use X-rays to determine cutting lines on lamb. And it just so happens that the same device, and some of the people in the room were part of doing this, worked out that we can also calculate lean, bone and fat, and giving lean meat yield back to producers. It's also helping optimise production when you can start to look at which lambs from a lean meat yield point of view are worth more in your business. It's delivering about $8 a head, just improving that precision in cutting lines, improving shelf life, reducing OH&S issues, and also giving that feedback back to producers who can tailor their production. If we just click on the one on the right, we're on the journey on the beef side. So this is a scribing system that's in Dinmore, that's operating commercially, but we're progressing on a similar system in lamb where a modular approach to looking at middle boning is the first part, because it's also quite a fiddly and complex part, but it's also capturing a lot of value in the beef carcass. So over the next few years, we'll have the prototype equipment, and by about 2024, we think there will be a commercial-ready beef boning automation middle boning system ready to scale up. I think the other really important piece, and I touched on this and I'll reinforce it a little bit, is that the pathway to adoption is just absolutely critical. When I got involved in looking after adoption, it was positioned as really an afterthought of R&D, so we were doing some really high quality research, delivering some outstanding papers and quality R&D, and then it was handed over to the adoption team to go and drive it. Well, now we don't approve a project without having a pathway to adoption, without having a plan of how we're going to get the end customer involved at the appropriate time in the research. And we're scaling up our investments. We're still doing large-scale awareness in events like this, but we're putting the bulk of our investment into where we can drive practice change and measure the attributable benefit. So it's working on producer demonstration sites, profitable grazing systems, because we know the starting point, we can measure the practice change, and we work directly on solving problems in producers' businesses directly. So that's where we're heading. And then the last part I was thinking about, well, what problems do we need genetics to solve? So it depends where you are in the country. But so for Northern Australia, one of the big drivers was improving weaning rates. And it was really driven off the back of reducing calf loss. But then we realised very quickly that no single project was going to solve that for us. And we've done a lot of work in this space over the years. So we set up a strategic partnership with producers, researchers and service providers to come up with and really define those problems. So female fertility, reproduction efficiency, nutrition, other management practices, even paddock design and where you put water and shade, and how do you manage those females from joining all the way through. So it's a whole farm system approach. But guess what? We're also seeing a big focus now where in Northern Australia where producers are saying, well, I don't put a lot of selection pressure on fertility because they didn't have access to the information. They're now demanding it. And what's happening is when we understand the problem, then we get the pull-through demand. And that's changing the way I think some of our northern producers are looking at, from a seed stock point of view, saying, well, if my customer wants more information on fertility, on days to calving, age of puberty, I can give it to them because we've now got some data coming out of the reference population work that they can directly connect to. And it's not being used as a marketing tool, it's actually how do I underpin what's important for my customer. So it's changing the conversation quite considerably. In the south, I think we've really seen some big strides in certain breeds and really making some big progress. We still get a lot of feedback though from the commercial sector saying, well, but how do I compare across breeds? And everything has a different set of genetic parameters, and I can't compare like for like even though the traits look the same. So we've gone ahead and put the breeds that had the highest numbers of registered animals in breed plan, head to head, looking at 5 cohorts of animals, and there's a lot of work going on to look at how do we deliver a multi-breed genetic evaluation. Well, can it be done to start with? But the quality of information is already going back into those breeds that are contributing those animals. For some breeds, it's opening up the genetic diversity in reference populations, and we're able to value add a lot of the progeny coming through to collect more data, more traits, and ultimately deliver a multi-breed genetic evaluation. And with the end game being we're delivering more genetic information to commercial producers, and ultimately that leads to a pull-through. So I think it's, but it needs careful consideration about how we evolve our current way of working. For the sheep industry, again, the reproduction efficiency of the flock and lamb survival was identified as the #1 priority. But as we found again, it's not a single. There's no single solution, no silver bullet. But equally, I think as we produce more calves, as we produce more lambs, ideally we're also thinking about and for who, for what purpose, what market destination, so we can optimise production within the environment within which we operate. And then equally we can deliver a better outcome for our customer and ultimately the consumer. And then we've got a whole new set of challenges. Our customers expect that our industry is sustainable. They expect that we are leaving the land in a better condition than when we started. And we're custodians of over 50% of the land mass of Australia, so we have a big responsibility. But equally, we have a big opportunity. I think we've been unfairly tarnished as being an emitter of greenhouse gases, but equally, we all know that we run a natural production system. And when the herd and flock are at stable numbers, we're sequestering carbon as fast as we emit it. And we've halved our emissions since 2005 baseline, and we can really go much further and be a net zero industry. And we're one of the few industries making the most progress in that space. And genetics has a significant role to play. We've now got some major beef and sheep projects where we're looking to select for low methane emitting animals. In addition to the feed additive technologies and looking at the pasture makeup, and the sheep industry is already claiming that they're climate neutral, so not adding to further temperature rise. And that's a significant milestone on the journey to being carbon neutral. And lastly, my last point is around the community. The community have expectations on sustainability, and I think the sustainability frameworks have done a great job of making sure we've got in balance the economic sustainability, environment and social elements so that we can meet our community expectations. And publications like Red Meat Green Facts are just being a single source of truth for when people are looking at environment, health, welfare and nutrition. And there's certainly been a big movement from looking at the role of food, the role of red meat as part of a balanced and healthy diet. And on all fronts, we've got a pretty good story to tell. There's a few hotspots for us to keep an eye on and make sure we've got our house in order, particularly around pain relief and animal welfare. It's an area of focus, but again, genetics has a significant role to play. So I hope that goes some way to setting the scene today, and happy to take any questions. I think we're using Slido, aren't we?
I mean, just on the greenhouse emissions, you use the term claimed with the sheep industry. Obviously, the rest of, especially Australia, is talking about how bad we are. What are we doing from a PR point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. So that information is part of the Good Meat website, and that underpins the Red Meat Green Facts. So that was part of that publication, and then we can update it all the time. So then we're using social media platforms to get that information out there, and it's backed up by credible science. So the beauty of that is that it came out of a CSIRO project that we did. So it's backed up by science, and then we're using social media platforms to get that information out there. We've got a whole new approach of using influencers in social media, and but equally we have the central source of truth that has the credibility and the science to back it up.
So Mick, last time we had one of the genetics forums up in Brisbane a few years ago, there was a lot of talk about automation and DEXA-based technologies in beef. Would you mind giving us an update on where that got to in terms of being implemented and using it in automation tech?
Yeah, so there was I guess back at the time we got pretty excited about the opportunities for the technology. We probably had to change tact quite significantly, because I think the real value for putting a DEXA in the abattoir is to drive automation. I think too, in the beef side, there was concern that we were going to get the balance wrong between yield and quality. We've definitely seen, we haven't dropped the ball on quality. If anything, it continues to go up, and the MSA data continues to back that up. And we've continued to grade a larger proportion of the herd. So we're over 50% of the herd being graded, 3.5 million cattle every year now being MSA graded. But I think we're finding that the opportunity to improve both quality and yield is still there. But what I expect now is that the adoption of DEXA will be off the back of our ability to commercialise automation, and then we'll see the DEXA used for lean meat yield. However, through programs like the Advanced Livestock Measurement Technologies that we're looking at the objective measurements for quality, the group's also come up with a calculation for lean meat yield. So we can do that, and we can do that now with the 30 million records in MSA using carcass weight, P8 fat, rib fat, and eye muscle area to be able to give lean meat yield feedback. So we don't necessarily need technology to do that, it just improves accuracy. So what we'll find is that we'll be able to start giving lemur yield feedback and then build on it over time. It's a bit like improving the accuracy of breeding values. We're happy to receive the data. We also recognise that once it hits some better accuracy thresholds, we can rely on that information more. That's what we need to do more of in the industry, and not be worried about sitting on that data until it's perfect. That's probably a lesson that I think is a really good one, that we need to continue to drive change for the right reasons. And the commercial sector will determine value, because the opportunity is, and you'll hear later from Will Barton in his session, I think there's a big opportunity for us to transition to more of a value-based pricing mechanism beyond where we are today.
Awesome, thank you. So we actually have a few questions coming through the Slido app now. So we might start with one from Chris Howie. Is developing a carbon footprint assessed program a better entry point for producers than jumping straight to tradable offsets?
Yes, is the short answer. I think there's a lot of risk in jumping in the market first. I think you need to know your baseline. I think you need to understand, when you understand the baseline, it'll also give you a lot of insights into where you need to start to look at how you offset your current emissions. And then there's two elements to that. How do you become net zero in your own business and generate carbon credits? And then there's a decision to be then made about whether you trade them or not. And it might just be that there might be enough demand for low carbon products. There might be some premiums in the market that may outweigh selling the carbon credit. And that's the sort of stuff that we need to do first. For anyone that's coming with a check up front, it could quickly become a liability if you're not able to meet building your soil carbon thresholds that are expected. So what we're doing is separating how you engage with the market, and the market needs to mature a lot compared to what can you do in your business that builds soil carbon, offsets emissions, and ultimately being productivity led when you do that. So I think we can do that without reducing herd and flock numbers, improve productivity, and get carbon credits off the back of then best management practice. So I think it's a really interesting dynamic of how we then look at production, carbon, and how you engage with the market.
Awesome, thank you. So we'll leave it with a nice easy one. Mick, what's the genetics projects that excites you the most?
How do I narrow it down, Sam? There's so many. Because, it's an interesting one, because it was 2016 when we kicked off the genetics consortium. And off the back of the first two rounds, we had $75 million worth of new investment that wasn't in the genetics space. And we attracted mostly private investment that we could match through the donor company when we were traditionally reliant on the levy in this space. So we weren't using producer levies all of a sudden to still address the highest priority projects. I think the one that is probably flying below the radar a little bit, that when they had a field day, it attracted over 200 producers to Spyglass, was looking at the repronomics program. To me, that demonstrated what could be done and demonstrated and really shifting the dial on fertility in Northern Australia. I think it also showed what can be done running breeds head-to-head for a long period of time and seeing what genetic progress can be made. So to me, that was, if I had to name one, but I'm not too biased, because I just think since 2016, driving that level of investment in genetics, we've seen, and as you'll see over the course of the day, and probably what you've already seen, is how much progress has been made since we started from a pretty low base, and what that investment is now enabling us to do, and the rate of change will only increase, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. So if everyone can, thank you very much.